Hello, everybody. Thank you again for joining us for another week of an amazing topic. My name is Kyle Nolan. I'm the Associated Student Body President.
And I am Clint Kent, the Associated Student Body Vice President.
Again, just like we had last week, this week we have our amazing guest, Sister Barrett, full of knowledge, full of years of academia, and full of understanding when it comes to this topic. Last week, if you missed it, please watch that one first. That is part one.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to be part two. Sister Barrett will hand the floor back to you on part two of this topic.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, yes, if you didn't watch part one, please do so. I'm talking about 3 parts of an apostolic education, answering the question of why an apostolic education. And part 1 is about God and basically having a theological foundation that is important, and that as apostolic Pentecostals, you're going to get a perspective that is truer to the original intent of the writers than you might get from other perspectives. So that's kind of the gist of our conversation. Please go back and view that if you haven't. But basically, everything starts with God because he desires to rule over everything he created, both the visible realm and the visible earthly realm and the invisible spiritual realm. So in the last one, we were talking more about spiritual things. So this one's going to be a little bit more on the earthly realm. And if I were to show you the Venn diagram of the 3 parts, the first one was God. This second part, I would put the word wisdom. And the heart of biblical theology comes from the intersection and the interconnectedness of the physical and the spiritual realms. So let's look at how wisdom really, in a sense, ties those two together for us. So Proverbs 2:6 says, "For the Lord giveth wisdom, out of his mouth cometh knowledge and understanding." And so a lot of times you'll hear people speak about knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, and they use them as a kind of a 3-part thing. And we've been taught that in order to acquire wisdom, that we also need to have knowledge and understanding, but sometimes we don't distinguish between those. So there can be some overlap. I don't want to make it seem like they're nice, clean categories, but I do want to differentiate them a little bit because I think that will help us. So in terms of knowledge, think of knowledge as the what of what you're learning. It's the factual information. It's the content of what you're learning. Now, wisdom is closely associated with knowledge, but wisdom isn't the content. The content of what you're learning is knowledge. And then we also talk about understanding. Understanding typically refers to your ability to grasp something or to comprehend what you're learning. And I do want to back up on the word for knowledge in the Bible. It does have the concept of really understanding, because the word knowing or to know in the Bible can have a very intimate context. For example, it uses the word when it talks about Adam knowing his wife. Right. So even though we think of knowledge as just having information and having an awareness of something, there can actually be a deep relational aspect to it as well. But for our purposes, we're going to kind of differentiate them as knowledge is the content of what you are learning, and understanding is really grasping or comprehending that. So then if we look at wisdom, sometimes that particular Hebrew word, which is chokhmah, is translated as skill. So wisdom utilizes knowledge and understanding to successfully and effectively operate in this world in alignment with the principles of how it was designed, and also how this world interacts with the divine. So I'm gonna kind of give you a few different definitions, and we'll unpack them because it's kind of dense. Normally I have this up on a PowerPoint screen, so let me say that one again. But if knowledge is the what and understanding is grasping or comprehending it, wisdom is utilizing it. It's utilizing knowledge and understanding to effectively and successfully operate in this world in alignment with the principles of how it was originally designed. So we have to begin with knowledge and understanding, but really it's the utilization of those skillfully. That's what wisdom is. So wisdom can be viewed as a faculty or as an ability. It's something that can be developed. It can be taught and learned. And once it's acquired, it can be enhanced. So there's this idea that so one of the things that makes higher education so powerful is that if you really receive instruction properly, you're not just getting knowledge, you're not just gaining understanding from it, but you are utilizing it. And that's why it doesn't just inform, but it transforms you.
That's good.
Wow.
So let's
Sister Barrett, if I could jump in here just for a moment.
Absolutely.
I want to tell you that, of course, I was blessed to be able to sit through this same presentation at Challenge Week. And like right now, it just blows my mind. Thank you so much.
I feel bad for you. You're hearing it twice.
No, it's sinking in even more, which is why I wanted to say, while I was sitting there at Challenge Week listening to your presentation, I had like an analogy in my mind trying to understand the difference between understanding, wisdom, and all that you're speaking of. And it was somewhat of the analogy of like a well and, of course, a bucket from which or through which you draw this water out. And I don't think I could flesh it out just exactly right. So would you mind, and I hate to put you on the spot here, but would you mind using that same analogy to try to help us understand kind of what the difference is between knowledge, wisdom, and understanding?
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy. You've come up with a great idea. When you are learning, you are dipping that well. I mean, you are dipping your bucket into that well of knowledge, which ultimately knowledge, wisdom, and understanding come from God. And that's, again, why we go back to God as being that first step and having a proper theological perspective. But you're taking your bucket and you are dipping it into that well of knowledge. And then I think we could say that drinking of that is you're gaining understanding. So you're taking it in. That could be the gaining understanding. And then the utilization of it is what wisdom is. So there is you're getting the knowledge, you're taking it in the knowledge, gathering meaning and understanding from it, and then utilizing it is wisdom. So maybe you could think of it as you've taken that water in, you're refreshed, and now you're going to go out and do the work of God with it. That's wisdom.
Amen. Wow. Okay. Well, thank you so much for unpacking that for me. That helps.
Oh no,
tremendously.
great idea. That's a great analogy. So I'm going to work on that a definition of wisdom a little bit more. And some of these I'll repeat a couple times if they're kind of dense, but wisdom. So again, this is why we did God first, because it's going to keep tying back to that. Wisdom keeps connecting back to God. Wisdom seeks to discover God's order in life and then proceeds to successfully fit into that order. So you have to have the knowledge of the what. You have to understand it and comprehend it. But ultimately, wisdom is the skill of discovering God's order. That's part of the knowledge and understanding. You've discovered how he created things. So you have to believe he's the one who created it. And you have to read the Bible to understand how he created it and to learn the principles that we should be living by. And then to successfully fit into those principles, to apply those principles, is wisdom. So most of the ancient religions, including Mesopotamia and Egypt, they had some type of wisdom teachings because all of them wanted to help the members of their society cope with daily life. So actually, wisdom literature was prevalent in the ancient Near East. It was a common genre. And so it's not unusual that Israel would have had it too. Of course, a lot of biblical scholars want to argue, how much did Israel borrow? Did they just take from the ancient Near Eastern examples? Because a lot of times they want to argue that nothing was original that came from Israel. But Israel's ethical instruction or wisdom teaching is unique or special because they really focused on the centrality of God in the daily affairs of life. So it wasn't just secular teaching for how to be a good citizen, but it has God in the center. And that makes sense because God is the source of wisdom. So wisdom is a process of training. It can be learned. And in order to develop character, it equips people to live within God's divine order and to be able to manage life's complexities within that order. So that one's a long one. I'll say that again. So wisdom is a process of training, meaning we can learn it in order to develop character, to equip people to live within God's divine order and to be able to manage all of life's complexities within that order. Now, why should we search for wisdom? Because that's ultimately how we're going to find fulfillment. So it's very straightforward. Searching for wisdom gives us insight in how the world works, not based on our perspective, but based on how it actually works because we understand God's perspective. And again, that I don't want to keep going back to it, but that's why we need God first. He's the creator. He's the one that set the world in motion. He's the one who set all the principles. So we have to understand those principles from the one who created them. That's why ultimately wisdom comes from him. Knowledge, wisdom, and understanding have to be rooted in him. And it's so interesting. I'll just throw this in as an aside, but I used to teach K-12 education, and I've taught in a various formats. So I've done homeschooling, public school as a long-term sub, private school. I've done private tutoring. So a number of venues, public charter school. But I've actually talked to parents who, when we had the option of making or providing schooling that was Christian or providing school that would be less expensive and utilize tax dollars, but not Christian, I argued for the Christian school, even if it cost money. And I had parents that argued for the secular education because they said, you know, my child, we go to church, we do religious things at home. I'm not concerned about it coming through their schooling. But my perspective is, tell me one subject that we learn that doesn't need to be from a godly perspective. And of course, schooling is not just the content of what we're learning, but it's all of the socialization that happens in a school setting as well, that you want God to be at the center of those relational interactions as well. But I don't believe, now, can we teach math? Okay. But even that one, when you recognize that God is the one who set those mathematical principles in place, and of course, science is an obvious one, psychology is an obvious one. There's so many subjects that why wouldn't we want to have a Christian and a biblical perspective in studying those subjects? Since God is the one who created everything, how can you really have a full understanding of the knowledge you could gain without connecting it to the one who is the source of it? And what does this have to do with higher education? Someone can't teach you wisdom if they don't have wisdom. And they can't have true wisdom if they don't have a relationship with the one who is the source of wisdom. So there has to be that relationship with God for someone to have spiritual formation, a biblical lens, a supernatural worldview. That theological aspect then is the framework through which we gain knowledge and wisdom and understanding. And what's the beginning of wisdom? One of you guys can throw that out. What's the beginning of wisdom? What does the Bible tell us is the beginning of wisdom? Not to put you on the spot. Do you remember, Clint, you went to my presentation? The fear of the Lord. Thank you. Yeah. And
I was just going to say, I will defer to Clint on this one.
Now, and I'm sure there may be multiple reasons why, but in my sense, I mean, from my perspective, why the fear of the Lord? Why is at the beginning? Because it's God who gives wisdom. He's the fountain of all wisdom. And fear of the Lord, now a lot of people have different definitions of what that is. I do believe that it is predominantly reverence and awe, but I do believe that there's a trembling to it too. When we're really in his presence and understand his majesty, there is a trembling that is more than just reverence. And having the fear of the Lord, I mean, we need to have the reverence for him, respect for his law, respect for his will, respect for his right to rule over our lives, and have that respect and that awe with a little bit of trembling. So it's through the fear of the Lord that we have a right attitude towards him. We have a true conception of him. And then from that basis, he answers our readiness. We get knowledge. Think of the bucket, Clint, the analogy you provided. He is that source of knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. So we're lowering that bucket to glean from him, drinking it in, gaining the understanding from him, and then applying it in our lives. But we can only do that by having a right relationship with him. And then the fear of the Lord, it motivates us and it puts us in a right relationship with him to receive from him the knowledge and understanding, and then to be motivated to live according to those principles. If knowledge is not just the what, but it's the actual doing, what motivates us to do that? It's that love relationship with him. It's for everything he has done for us, salvation and beyond. It's our duty, but we do it out of love. And so if we earnestly and sincerely seek after God, we gain that knowledge, understanding, and wisdom that comes from him. We make that effort, and then he responds. If we just seek knowledge for the sake of knowledge, it's really ultimately vanity. Worldly knowledge is false knowledge.
Yeah.
We need God's knowledge, or else we're really chasing after foolishness.
That's good.
And that's part 2.
That's good. Incredible.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Thank you.
Well, but I don't think I can add anything to an incredible presentation thus far.
You guys
Clint,
are
did
so
you want to
sweet.
say anything?
No, I thank you so much for clearing up that analogy. And
That was a great
this is so
idea.
great. It's very thought provoking, and thank you for that.
Thank you. Glad to be here. So we got one more part to
thank you
go.
so much.
Stay tuned.
We do have one more part to go. Absolutely. Thank you all for joining us again on this podcast. Incredible information thus far, and one that, even though I'm sitting here right now, I will be re-listening to over and over again to make sure I get everything.
Yes.
Thank you again for joining us to this podcast here this week. Look forward to seeing you all next week, and with the last part, and which ultimately will sum up this series, but full of just incredible information. Thanks for joining us. God bless.